All right, well, welcome to this week's campaign catch-up. We've got CBN's David, Brody, and John Stolnis, who are in Philadelphia ahead of the first presidential debate. Gentlemen, how's it going?
We just had lunch at Reading Terminal Market, knocked down a cheesesteak.
There we go.
So we're sleepy, but doing fine.
Well, I mean, can confirm that cheesesteak was amazing. Thank you, John Stolnis.
Yes.
John Stolnis.
Yes. I'm glad you guys are getting the full cheesesteak experience, a must-do anytime in Philadelphia. All right, now down to business, guys. Yep. Donald Trump, the latest polls, we've got Nate Silver's model, as we talked about last time, says if the election were held today, Trump would win. Your guys' reaction to that, and then we'll get into debate stuff, because obviously that's what you're there for. Go ahead, David.
Well, look, first of all, Labor Day polls and the final results on Election Day typically differ historically by about 4 points. So take it all with a grain of salt. We start with that. And as for any predictions, anybody that can predict this race at this point, I've got a bridge to sell you in Brooklyn as well, because I tell you what, we have no idea how this is all going to shake out. And of course, the debate here in Philadelphia is going to be key to all of it. Dan, what's interesting to me is, and the figure I'm thinking about is 15%. And let me explain. If you look at the polling, about 85% of people have a firm opinion and a firm idea about what Kamala Harris is about, what she stands for. 15% don't know. And you know what? That might sound like a low number, but actually it's a pretty high number in a very polarized electorate. I think that's important to understand. When you have a polarized electorate and you have 15% of people that still don't know exactly what you are about, it's a great opportunity for Kamala Harris in this debate to define herself, and it's also a great opportunity for Donald Trump to define her in front of a key audience that could indeed decide the election, Dan.
Yeah, and John, the Harris campaign, they did put up her policy positions on the site ahead of this debate as well.
They did, and that was something that the Republicans had been calling for, because she didn't seem to have a position on most items other than what she had been talking about on the campaign trail. So now there's a more a thorough list of different economic policies, foreign affairs policies, energy policies, immigration policies, everything there that you could take a look at. And it's not loaded with bullet points and details, which of course is to be expected. It's generally highlights of what it is that her campaign and what her platform would be if she were to win the White House. And it's, as you would imagine, a continuation, I think, of a lot of what the Biden administration has been doing. But it would also kind of move things into a newer direction as well. And it kind of remains to be seen what the devil in the details is with a lot of those policy positions. But, the same can be said on the other side of the ticket as well. So, they're going to articulate these positions more on Tuesday night, tomorrow night. They're going. That's when we're really going to start to hopefully get some more detail. When the moderators will start to drill down on some of these different positions and allow these candidates to defend their positions and counterattack each other, and try and fact check each other rather than have the moderators do it here on Tuesday night.
Yeah, and then so of course you guys are there for this debate, and I've already seen things on there. Harris kind of her team sort of lowering the bar a little bit, saying hey, well, it would, the fact that it's muted here, it's already going against us, and so a typical strategy, right, to try to lower the bar heading into the debate. But David, what do you see as kind of the what to look for here coming up tomorrow night?
Well, I think the key for Kamala Harris is not to make an unforced error. And let me be more specific, not to make an ad-libbed unforced error. This is the first time we're going to see her kind of in full ad-lib mode. There'll be no notes. And so we see if there's a viral clip of her that somehow is a cringe-worthy moment for the Kamala Harris campaign. And if there is, it's a bad night. If there's not, it's probably a relatively good night, or at least stable night. And, as for Trump, it's a different ballgame. He's got to go, look, we've talked about this before. He's got to be on message. He's got to be on point. And I think he has to take a page out of the Reagan playbook. I'm curious, different version of Reagan, because when Reagan was going up against Carter. He said, look, Reagan asked voters in that debate against Carter, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? And then Reagan said, if you're not, I'd like to offer an alternative. And it was such a powerful moment during that debate because Reagan knew people were not better off years before that. And now here we are. So I think if Donald Trump sticks to that playbook, he'll be fine. But Donald Trump sticking to a playbook typically don't go in the same sentence. So that's why we'll be tuning in tonight, or excuse me, tomorrow night in Philly.
Yeah, John, what are you looking for? What are some things kind of top of mind for you as we get ready for this debate?
Well, I'm going to steal something that David talked about as we were in the car driving up here, and that is the different expectations placed on each of these two candidates. With Donald Trump, I mean, when he's asked about specific policy questions on the campaign trail, in certain areas he really struggles. There was a question about child care and what legislation he would like to see passed in order to help make child care more affordable, and it was at the New York Economic Club in New York last week. And he didn't have an answer for it. And he did 2 minutes trying to come up with one, but it didn't land. But there is no real penalty for him on that. Whereas if Kamala Harris were to stumble on a policy question like that, I think she would get dinged. And I think the expectation in this debate on Tuesday night is that former President Trump doesn't really have to land and nail policy arguments and positions and get all the details right. Whereas I think Kamala Harris, if she doesn't do those things, I think she will get dinged for that. So what does Kamala Harris then have to do in order to level the playing field? Well, then she's got to try and get Donald Trump to say things or react in a way that's going to turn off suburban moms, that's going to turn off independent voters who still aren't sure who they're going to vote for. And that might be more difficult with the muted microphone. So I also will say, too, I think Trump has been lowering the bar for Kamala Harris by calling her unintelligent, by calling her not terribly smart, by saying Biden was smarter than her. I don't think that's a smart thing ahead of a debate where you have to basically, all she's got to do is not dumb. And I think that's a bar certainly that Kamala Harris can clear, and probably clear it by quite a bit. But again, like David said, if there's a faux pas, if there's a meandering, kind of like I'm doing right now, then she could probably get into trouble.
So, Dan, if I could just quickly tack on to that. Yeah, listen, here's the thing. There's a couple of things, but let me just stick with one. She did not do a good job in the Dana Bash interview of answering the question, which is a very simple question, a question that all presidential candidates should be able to answer. What are you going to do on day one? I'm thinking that question will come up again. It will be a redo for her, and she better have an answer. Because remember, when you're asked that question, the standard answer is always about executive orders. For example, Trump, he's answered that question. Drill, baby, drill. We're going to do an executive order on drilling. We're going to do an executive order on the border. We're going to close the border. Whatever, certain things he's going to do as it relates to policy. But she didn't have an executive order answer. And she's going to need to have one, because I have a feeling that question's going to come up. And that's important. Instead, what she did in the Dana Bash interview is she started to go into mini ballad with a question about, an answer about the middle class and what she's going to do in the middle class. They ain't going to cut it. Especially if she blows it for a second time in a row. So I think that's important to note.
Yeah, and a couple other things. I noticed that they leaked out these statements. Obviously, they're intentional when they get out to the press, but one of them was saying that Harris is preparing for personal insults and sling. So I'm interested in a second. I have two more observations, and then you can respond to whichever ones that stick out to you. But that one, is Trump going to? We all know he's got a thing. He loves to give people nicknames. So is he going to throw a few of those out there tonight, and how many, or tomorrow night, and how many? Another thing that's been gaining traction is the radical kind of phrase. We've seen that Kamala's too radical. She's too progressive. We've seen them sort of leaning into that. The Trump campaign. Will we hear that? And then also, how will Harris balance this? They want to say they're going in a new direction, but yet she's been the vice president for 4 years. So those are a couple of things on my mind. You guys pick one. John, you can start with whichever one you want to respond to there.
Yeah, I've been giving some thought about the whole, well, if you want to take the country in a new direction, why didn't you start that 4 years ago when President Biden took office? And I think we all understand that the vice presidency has a very limited role. It really is determined by whatever it is the president wants the vice president to be in charge of. So no doubt at the lunches that they have, no doubt there are policy discussions that Harris has input in. But the vice president, and with the exception of maybe Dick Cheney in the George W. Bush administration with foreign policy, and I guess to some extent Biden in the Obama administration as well with foreign policy. But generally speaking, with domestic policy, you'd be hard-pressed to find a vice president that has a lot of power, that can really move the needle, really move the direction one way or the other. And I think Vice President Harris can make that argument and say, I was the vice president. I served at the pleasure of President Biden, and we accomplished a lot together. There's more that I want to get done. There are things that I am prioritizing over President Biden, over some of what he wanted to do, and obviously clean it up, make it so that it's, sounds good. But I think you can make that argument, and I think you can make it land to understand, like, each administration is its own, even if it's the same party, even if you were in the administration previous. So I think there's an easy answer there for her if she's able to articulate it clearly.
David?
Well, and a couple of things. Yes, I think he'll say the word radical a lot. He'll probably say she's dangerously liberal if he stays on the campaign talking points. But once again, he probably won't do that. But he'll say radical many times. And he definitely will. What was the first thing you said? I'm having
the personal attacks. That's the one that Kamala said they were preparing for, a bunch of insults and things like that.
I think they're going to be kind of few and far between, and I think they'll be targeted, and I think they'll be mild. I think Trump typically rises to the situations like this because just when you think he's going to go on the attack, he does the exact opposite. He always kind of keeps you guessing. So I think he's going to be very composed tomorrow night. That's what. There's a poll out that shows that the voters are saying right now 60% of voters see Donald Trump as the change candidate, 60%. 40% see her as the change candidate. So this is the problem for Kamala Harris, and this is part of why she's going to have a hard time presidency in this election, quite frankly, because she's trying to be, in a way, the hope and change candidate. She's calling it hope and joy, but the voters are seeing Trump as that. Is that Kamala Harris is talking about hope and joy, but voters out there don't feel very hopeful and don't feel very joyful. So when you're trying to mix the two together, it's difficult. For her to say one thing, I'm preaching hope and joy, but if voters aren't feeling it, you've got a situation that's they're missing each other, and that's a problem for her.
All right, CBN's David Brody and John Stolnis. They're in Philadelphia at the Pennsylvania Convention Center ahead of tomorrow night's debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Gentlemen, we will be live tomorrow night on YouTube ahead of the debate, and look forward to all your reporting there thereafter after this thing wraps up. But thanks for being here today. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan.